I'm Robert Carty, Senior Account Manager at Inoapps.
I'm James Anthony, CTO at Inoapps.
James, we're here to talk about risk, but briefly, why do you think an organization would want to move to OCI in the first place?
I think there's predominantly two main reasons organizations look to migrate to cloud, and Oracle Cloud Infrastructure just being one possible venue. We're talking about cost savings and we're talking about agility. In terms of cost savings, you can see here a case study we did with Galliford Try with some fairly significant reductions in cost. And right now, that's everything that's going off in the world with COVID, recession, etc. Cost savings are clearly something that's front and center of everybody's mind. If you contrast cloud and the migration to cloud and look at how Intel economics are predominant these days, people are probably shifting from an Intel platform to an Intel platform. Cloud becomes largely analogous to just doing a hardware shift on premises, but with a significant potential to reduce cost over doing that in a traditional fashion as well. Think as people look at their Oracle estates as well. And this is something we touched on a lot in our last webinar, and the link will be available for you in the comments section to go to. When you've got a large Oracle estate and you move to the cloud, there's a definite opportunity to work with an organization like ourselves to rationalize your Oracle license estate and therefore hopefully gain some efficiencies and probable cost savings there as well. And as I say, we talked about that a lot in our last webinar. In terms of agility, as we move to cloud, I think that to me is the main go forwards benefit of cloud. Clearly, we can make some cost savings and stack those up year on year. But as an operational guy and a guy who operates in the cloud, to me, it's the agility aspect that gives people the main benefit. Being able to clone more quickly. That allows us to test upgrades, etc., stand up new services, trial new services. I think those are the main reasons people would look to move to the cloud in the first place, Rob.
That's good, James. I suppose you mentioned agility, and why would you believe that the move to a cloud or a platform like OCI Cloud be perceived as risky?
Well, I think if people think about a migration to cloud as being risky, I think there's a definite perception versus reality gap going off there. I talked in my previous answer when you asked me the question about the fact that for a lot of organizations, you're going to be migrating from Intel hardware on premises to Intel hardware just running in the cloud. So really, if you think about it, that's just a hardware shift. And from that side of things, we really can reduce the risk, and that minimizes the risk because you're not changing to a different platform. I think there's the risks from not modernizing, not doing things. We've got a lot of products right now, both in the Oracle suite and also in operating systems, Windows 2008, some of the older versions of Linux, or coming to end of life or certainly being de-supported. And therefore, the risk of not doing anything is sometimes just as great as well. If you're in a regulated industry, having something that isn't in support and is an end-of-life product carries a risk in itself from a compliance perspective, and therefore all those undisclosed liabilities on the balance sheet, etc. as well. So for me, I really don't see the risk of migrating to cloud being any greater than just doing a modernization on-prem, for instance.
That's a really interesting point, James, if I can take up on that. It's around the licensing model that you mentioned. I recently did a survey of my customers, and over 70% of them weren't aware of their licensing options, whether it's BYOL, customer to cloud, and various different options that are across the whole migration policy that Oracle have.
Yeah, Rob, and going on from that, and again, going back to something we touched on in the previous webinar, and probably worth people reviewing that if they've not, that ability to use the elasticity inside cloud infrastructure as well. So perhaps to take a lower base level and then burst when they need it, as opposed to a traditional on-prem model where we always sized for peak. You don't necessarily need to do that and have idle capacity that costs you money during normal running as well.
Once again, interesting, James. I suppose leading on from that, the risk versus reward scenario on any migration is quite high. But from the performance metrics that the customers have seen on stuff we've worked together, could we kind of delve into the performance metrics that we can see before a migration?
Yeah, so I guess you're referring to everybody's always concerned with any migration, and cloud's just another migration, upgrade, whatever you want to call it, that performance will somehow degrade, because performance is always a major concern to anybody. And for me, cloud offsets that in many ways. The first is especially if you're coming off older hardware. Yes, I know people are talking about Moore's law breaking down slightly now, but you're coming onto the latest generation of hardware. That should give you a performance boost. And one of the things we know from our experience and working with customers, Rob, and I know you've been involved in a few of these, is the I/O, especially in the Oracle Cloud, is just a phenomenal platform. And where we have things like databases, which are often bound by how fast they can do physical I/O, that is a game changer for organizations. And we've got some of the statistics up here. And what we're contrasting is an old-fashioned, admittedly, but when we're talking old-fashioned, we're talking a few years ago, spinning hard disks. And we're looking at a number of hard disks with Oracle's 3 tiers of storage contrasted against them. So we talk about the low cost, the balanced, and the high performance storage. And you can see the I/O figures as a comparison here. So IOPS, IOs per second, and we're talking about 4K IOPS at that stage. And then we've got the column in there which shows if you've got sort of 6 400 gig volumes, giving you about 2.4 terabytes worth of usable space, you can see the number of IOPS that the Oracle platform is capable of. And that final column contrasts and says, if you were to have a RAID 10 array, so mirrored disks, or mirrored hard disks, how many disk drives you would need to provide that level of performance. And you can see that the numbers are quite frankly staggering. And we know the Oracle Cloud has the most performant I/O platform at one of the cheapest costs, if not the cheapest cost, compared to any of the cloud providers. And that really does allow us to be sure that we're going to get great performance. We can have elastic configurations. We can now mix and match how much CPU we want versus how much memory. But underneath all of that, we've got this incredibly proficient I/O platform and an incredibly high performance network layer as well. So in all of the cloud migrations we've done, bar none, performance has improved from the on-prem situation. So from a risk side of things, it just doesn't factor in reality.
And I suppose, James, we both can give a real life example from our last customer who's moved from OCI, is that their IT department have come back and said it's too fast. So it's not, in theory, you can't, like we've said before, you can't go get an instant cup of Nescafe. You can't really enjoy your coffee. You press the button and it's done.
Yeah, absolutely. That was quite amazing feedback. That, you know, when your system's being described as too fast, you know you've done a really good job. But in fairness, that was all about the power of the platform as much as the work we did.
So in any of these large scale projects, one of the key considerations that I've seen and the questions we've taken is around downtime, but downtime to the business. How would we give confidence back to the customer in these scenarios, James?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's always probably the other concern about how do we pick up what we have now and move it to the cloud. And it doesn't really matter these days whether an organization is large or small. People have got large volumes of data, and moving that to the cloud clearly presents people with a concern and therefore a risk around how much downtime am I going to have to take, how long am I going to have to do it. For me, and I think what's really good working in the Oracle arena is Oracle have been working for years on technologies that allow us to migrate, to upgrade, to move things between platforms, be that new hardware, as we talked about, or perhaps across operating systems as well, and allow us to do that with minimal amounts of downtime. You know, most of us who come from an Oracle background are familiar with things like Oracle Data Guard. We can create a physical copy of a database somewhere else in the cloud in this manner, and we can carry on rolling it forwards in an incremental fashion using our transactional logs. And then we switch over rather than fail over, switch over implying we do it gracefully when we come to do the migration. We can use incremental backups and recovery approach, and therefore we can spend time shipping that first big backup across. We've used, where we've migrated multiple terabytes, we've used the data transfer service where we can actually send the data to Oracle of that first big multi-terabyte backup. They recover it into object storage for it. We create the initial database from there, and then we move the incrementals across. As I said, we've got cross-platform support. If you're on one of the newer versions of 12 or above inside the database, we have Oracle pluggable databases, and we can clone them across network links as well. So we've got, and we have had for some time, all of these capabilities, and therefore it's very rare these days we have big outages during a cloud migration. A lot of the time, the testing can actually take up more time than the migration itself. So if we have the capability then to do automated testing, that brings it down even further. So again, it's something I think the technology has caught up with what we need to do in the world, and therefore, again, going back to that, there's a perception that there's going to be big outages required. The reality is often very different.
That's great, James. And obviously, trying to bring it back to a real customer scenario, we've had our latest one who have moved to OCI, and they did a certain amount of feedback for their CFO. They took a snapshot of their tickets to the IT department the week after COVID, which obviously had quite a high peak spiking of incidents to the IT department, and then the go live weekend. And the go live weekend was actually taken like any other week. So from a disruption to the business, there was minimal or none. Today we've spoken an awful lot about the move to OCI, or very much predominantly IS and OCI migrations. What about the next layer up into PaaS?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're right. It's that lift and shift versus re-architect for cloud. For me, actually moving to PaaS infrastructure, and be that something like database cloud service, identity cloud service, and it's a lot of the cloud service aspect in there, where we are giving the cloud provider more support. We always talk cloud about that shared responsibility model, and we're giving more to the cloud provider from that. To me, that actually helps reduce our risk going forward. So there's a few reasons I say that. The first is we get standardization. If you go database cloud service from Oracle, you're running the same platform as somebody else running database cloud service, and another person running database cloud service. So from that side of things, you've got a sort of herd immunity, for want of a better word, given what we're talking right now. You're running a standardized platform, and therefore you reduce the risk by not running something bespoke. You also push off a lot of the SLAs to the cloud provider around things. And if we specifically talk about some of the areas we've noticed a lot of improvement and efficiency gains for our customers. So you can see some sort of slides we've got up here, or a couple of illustrations rather, that come up here of what a typical on-prem or lift and shifted into the cloud infrastructure for something like identity management might look like. We have a load balancer at the top. We have a couple of servers behind that connecting to a database. We have a DR copy of that. And that then goes away and talks to our Active Directory, our Oracle e-business, and our own custom applications. And we've got this infrastructure there just to support single sign-on services, etc. as well. If you contrast that to how it looks when we go to Identity Cloud, so a PaaS service from Oracle, we've stripped all of that away. And actually, therefore, we don't have to patch stuff. We don't have to secure stuff. We don't have to manage stuff that we had to on-prem. We don't have to worry about the availability of it. The cloud provider gives us a 99.99% availability, or higher in many cases from that, and we can therefore lean on them to do the work. If you look at some of these services, and we talked about Identity Cloud, I'm thinking about things like Oracle SOA, for instance, as well, where they're kind of ancillary services that sit around the core of our applications. By streamlining those and using a platform service, we reduce the number of working parts in it. When we reduce the number of working parts we have to maintain and patch and upgrade, etc., we must reduce our risk profile as well. So for me, they're great opportunities to streamline and gain efficiencies. One of the other things I think they do with migration to cloud in particular is they allow us to break the project down and stop a big bang approach. So we could take and use something like Identity Cloud or Integration Cloud to replace Oracle Identity and Access Management, or SOA, just picking on those two examples. And we can do that prior to migrating to the cloud. So we're already using cloud services, those PaaS services, while we remain on-prem, and therefore we've reduced again the number of components we have to shift to the cloud, and we've taken bite-sized chunks out of it. So I think they improve multiple areas or reduce the risk in multiple areas, both in terms of migrating there, but once we're there also.
Yeah, and as I always at the end, James, I try to give a customer scenario, and we have plenty of customers who have looked at that migration path from a legacy platform, be it OBIE, all the way from BIX, and now an awful lot of customers, same as ourselves, are running their business on OAX. We have plenty of customers who love the fact that they get the latest and greatest pieces of that application downloaded in obviously over the weekend or use times, but they're getting added benefit for the same amount of buy-in at the very beginning. So they're really building their business on products like that going into the future. And it's how Inoapps runs their business from the top down.
Yeah, to me, I think that's an area that cloud really, we talk about that agility when we talked about earlier on, and that level of innovation. The fact that the cloud providers, and Oracle in particular, roll out new features constantly and new functionality into the application that you just get. You get the notification, the functionality is rolled out, and you've got it without any downtime, without any patching, without any upgrading. That level of innovation that we're getting from the cloud providers gives us as organizations the ability to improve as well.
So James, you've spoken an awful lot about database migrations. What about a non-database migration?
Okay, yeah, so the stuff that sits in front of the database, absolutely. Yeah, and again, the risk of that is often very, very minimal. Most organizations will have a backup and recovery policy. The database I often talk about as being the key to that. They're often the largest things. That's where data is persisted to by those applications. We moved a large multinational energy company into the cloud recently, and they had a large number of apps that hung off the database. Actually, we just used a backup and recovery approach. You've got things like rsync. We have parallel tools that allow us to push stuff out to file systems and keep them in sync across a network link, a VPN or a fast connect, whoever it may be. Really, it's just enacting those backup and recovery plans, disaster recovery plans, whatever you want to call it, to move the mid-tier to another system. So actually, they're pretty straightforward, to be honest, Rob.
Also, James, in reference to migration, I know we're working together on our last customer. We noticed that, certain people take the low-hanging fruit around their proof of concept, or what we like to call a pilot. When we did our pilot for the last customer, we decided to take the test environment. Now, probably an awful lot more work for your team and the rest of the team to do that, but I think it gave, in the context of the migration, it gave the customer a hell of a lot more confidence that both their test system is in OCI and working, but also, on the flip side, the extra work we did at the beginning actually gave us less work towards the end of phase parts of the projects.
Yeah, that's right. It was much more analogous to live. So when it came to doing the other systems where they were scaled down, they were much easier. And in live, we'd solved all the challenges already. And that, as you say, gives people confidence, takes away the risk.
So James, a key part of a lot of these large transformational projects, definitely for me and you dealing with the customers, has been our approach to de-risking, debunking any of those words about the big lift and shift or the move and improve migrations. I think it'd be great if you pull into some kind of practical contents. I know we understand it, you understand it. We've really put a formula around finding from the customer what their worries and concerns are, and then attributing that model to it. Would you be able to just go into it a little bit more detail?
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing is working with an organization like Inoapps. We've done this hundreds of times. We understand this. We understand the technologies intimately as well, and especially when you're talking about Oracle technologies. You need the knowledge of the source system, in my mind, to get it to the destination as well. If you don't understand Oracle, big Oracle databases, eBiz, you talked about OBIE, SOA, Identity and Access Management, Hyperion, whatever else it may be. If you don't understand them in their traditional on-prem form, you just can't migrate them to the cloud. So that's the great thing from an Inoapps perspective. Not only do we understand how to migrate them to cloud, but we understand the source systems as well. We have quite a detailed set of processes and methodologies, as you can see here, around how we do that. And we work with the customers very much in a collaborative method. So it will be identifying the workloads, identifying the risks, identifying the most suitable migration strategy for that customer, putting some science into the sizing. And I know, and you'll see this if you watch the previous webinar, we talked about the fact that we can use elasticity in the cloud. So we'll size that to make sure a customer doesn't overspend in the cloud, because clearly reducing your initial acquisition cost of the cloud has got a considerable commercial benefit to organizations, especially now. We'll look at what the right cloud and the right technologies in the cloud might be for the customer and give people the pros and cons of both. You need to be able to provide that level of science and that level of honesty into your proposal to the customers, to really make them feel that you're guiding them in the best possible manner. And then really from that side of things, it's about bringing in the right skills. And that's an area we know we have. All our people are certified in migrating and Oracle technologies, bringing in the right skills with the right attitude to solve the problem, and then focusing on the testing and functionality. We've talked about this a tiny little bit today, but that's something I think people often overlook, especially if you're migrating Oracle e-Business Suite. Well, we've got a huge team of people who can test Oracle e-Business Suite, who can do functional and load testing and all of those things around it. So whilst people like me can quickly pick a system up and move it into the cloud, reducing the risk by leaning on our testing team, we know that that's been really essential for customers in getting the confidence that when they put stuff into the cloud, it works properly, and there are no defects around it as well. And as we talked about, most of the time, and in fact the predominant amount of time, things improve the performance. Things are better when we get there. But if you don't have those test plans, you can't convince management or whatever else it may be that you've got it absolutely right and there are no risks of doing the migration.
And it's definitely, I would testify to the collaborative approach, because it's making the technical people feel comfortable, but obviously from the senior management perspective of that there's no disruption to the business. Because on top of that, to take that collaborative approach, what we would like to do is offer to anybody who's on this webinar today a free 2-day OCI benefits assessment. And you can just reach out to me or James, whose emails will be on afterwards. And we'd love to talk to you about what we've seen our customers move to the cloud. Thanks very much, James. That's been really interesting for me and hopefully for everybody watching. I'd just like to continue on with that offering of the OCI benefits assessment for 2 days, and to say thank you again and see everybody soon.